Irish Stout is a beer style that I really enjoy and have brewed a bunch of times in different ways. But today I am trying out a special new recipe. Let's do it! Hi, I'm Martin Keane, taking the Homebrew Challenge to brew 99 beers in 99 weeks. Now, if you've been following my videos for a while, you may have noticed that I really enjoy this guy, Guinness. And because of that, I have tried my hands at brewing numerous Irish Stouts. In fact, Irish Stout is the reason that I installed a nitro setup in my home bar. And I've also tried to replicate that little Guinness twang by souring wort and adding it into the beer. Today's recipe comes from the homeland itself. This won the National Homebrewers Club Award in Dublin, Ireland. We're calling this one Des and Steph's Irish Stout. So what is this award-winning recipe? Well, we're going to build a beer with an original gravity of 1041, and that will give us about a 4% beer. The base malt for this beer is made up of 70% Golden Promise. Then we're going to add 15% of Flaked Barley, such an important ingredient in Irish Stout, and then 8% Chocolate Malt and 7% Roasted Barley. In addition to that, Steph tells me that getting the bicarbonate level in this beer up is pretty important. So in my water chemistry, as well as balancing for pH, like I normally do, I've also added in 3 grams of baking soda. I'm mashing here at 154 Fahrenheit or 68 Celsius for an hour. Then mashing out at 167 Fahrenheit or 75 Celsius. Now when it comes to adding yeast to your beer, you typically have 2 choices, liquid yeast or dry yeast. I pretty much have exclusively been using liquid yeast. Now, liquid yeast has many advantages. There are a ton of varieties, for example, which means it's just got a lot of choice. But liquid yeast does require a certain amount of babying as well. So this has to be kept cool, which means it's difficult to ship, and also means you have to find some room in your fridge to keep it. It also needs warming up when you're ready to use it. So with these white yeast packs, for example, you smack them, you let them warm up to ambient room temperature before you can add them in. You might also need to get hold of some wort and build a yeast starter if there isn't enough yeast in the liquid yeast pack that you're using. And liquid yeast is perishable, so it does tend to need a starter quite frequently unless you're using a very fresh pack. The biggest advantage though to the liquid yeast is of course the number of varieties that there are, and the fact that you can do stuff like overbuild yeast starters and save them for later. So for example, I can steal some yeast from a yeast starter, add it to this vial here, and freeze it in my frozen yeast bank and use it to be making more beers later on. Now, I don't think I've used dry yeast since my brewer's best extract days, but I really should look at this more because it has a lot of advantages. It doesn't need warming up and storing in a fridge. It's shelf stable, it's going to stay viable longer, and it's just a lot cheaper as well. And Steph recommended that I use this particular dry yeast, which is SO4, that's English ale yeast, for this beer. Now I remember back in my brewer's best days looking up what was needed to use this yeast, and I remember there was kind of a rehydration step where you had to add the yeast to some water at a certain temperature, let it hydrate in there, and then add it into the beer. So I took a look here at my liquid yeast, at the instructions, and here's what it says. Sprinkle into wort. Well, okay then. Now we're building a beer with an IBU of about 40. And for a beer batch size of 5 gallons or 21 litres, you would want to add at 60 minutes 1 ounce of EKG, East Kent Golding hops, as the bittering hop. Then with 20 minutes to go in the boil, that's when Fuggle is added, 1 ounce of that, and then another 1 ounce of Fuggle with 10 minutes to go. Beer has come out at 10:40, so it's now time to sprinkle my yeast on top of the wort. Fermenting at 66 Fahrenheit, 19 Celsius initially. Once the fermentation is coming to an end, I'll bump that up a couple of degrees. Right then, I'm curious to see how this dry yeast works out. Well, here we go. Guinness tasting time. Welcome, Lauren. Now, normally, with actually every Guinness recipe I've ever done, I've always served it on nitrogen. But the recipe didn't mention that it was served on nitrogen, so I decided to just try this on CO2, and I think it still looks the part, right?
Yeah, it does.
So what do you think about this Guinness?
It is very dark.
They say it's not black. They say it's like a really deep red.
I don't see red.
What about the smell? Oh, well, it smells right. This is exactly what I expect an Irish Stout to smell like.
Yeah, it smells very stouty.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's promising.
Yeah.
Okay, now, a little known fact. It is your father that taught me how to drink Guinness.
Oh, really?
In fact, I'd never had a Guinness before until I met him in Ireland. And I was kind of sipping it like a Stella, you know, little finger extended. And he's like, no, you take 3 full sips.
Because you got to get the foam too.
Yeah.
Like you need to have,
Yeah, so this is not a dainty drink. Take 3 full sips and that gives you all of the mouthfeel and the flavour of the beer. So,
let's do it.
Let's do it.
That does taste like a Guinness.
It really does.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Considering I thought the mouthfeel would be very different because on nitrogen you get a more creamy mouthfeel, but even without that, you've still, I think, got all of those characteristics you'd expect from a dry Irish Stout. Next week we are moving on not too far from this beer actually.
Okay.
So we're staying in the Irish Stout family, but for now I'm really pleased you like this beer. I love the beer. Thank you, Steph, for sending this in.
It's good, it's good.
Yeah, and cheers.
Cheers.